Muammar Gaddafi's journey to absolute power began not in a palace, but in the vast deserts of Libya. Born to a Bedouin family, he developed a deep-seated resentment for the lingering colonial influences and the monarchy that ruled his nation. As a young army officer, he was inspired by the pan-Arab nationalism of Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. In 1969, at the young age of 27, Gaddafi led a small group of military officers in a bloodless coup, overthrowing King Idris I while the monarch was abroad for medical treatment. He swiftly declared the Libyan Arab Republic, positioning himself as its brother leader and guide of the revolution, a title he would hold for more than 4 decades, shaping every aspect of Libyan life according to his unique and often erratic political ideology. Under Gaddafi's control, Libya was transformed. He nationalized the country's vast oil reserves, using the immense wealth to fund extensive public works projects. Schools, hospitals and housing were built, and literacy rates saw a significant increase. He introduced his third universal theory, a blend of socialism and Islamic principles outlined in his infamous Green Book, which was presented as an alternative to both capitalism and communism. This ideology rejected traditional democracy, instead promoting a system of people's congresses and people's committees. In reality, this system was a facade for a deeply authoritarian state, where all power was concentrated in Gaddafi's hands, creating a cult of personality around him. Life in Gaddafi's Libya was a paradox of social progress and brutal repression. While citizens benefited from state-subsidized services and a rising standard of living fueled by oil revenues, they lived in a climate of constant fear. Dissent was not tolerated. Political opponents, real or imagined, were systematically targeted by a ruthless security apparatus. His revolutionary committees acted as spies in every community, and public executions were broadcast on television to intimidate the populace. Thousands of Libyans were imprisoned, tortured, or simply disappeared for questioning the regime's authority. This iron-fisted control ensured his long reign but created a society simmering with underlying tension and suppressed grievances that would one day erupt. Internationally, Gaddafi styled himself as a revolutionary leader, supporting various movements across the globe, from the Irish Republican Army to anti-colonial groups in Africa. His unpredictable foreign policy and revolutionary rhetoric, however, quickly isolated Libya from much of the world. He harbored a deep distrust of Western powers, which he viewed as imperialistic forces seeking to exploit Libya's resources. This antagonistic stance, combined with his authoritarian rule at home, defined the first few decades of his long and tumultuous time in power. He cultivated an image as a defiant anti-Western figure, a role he played with theatrical flair on the world stage, all while tightening his grip on the Libyan people. During the 1980s, Libya's international standing plummeted as the Gaddafi regime became increasingly associated with state-sponsored terrorism. The world watched with alarm as Libya was linked to a series of violent acts, cementing its status as a pariah state. The most notorious of these were the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, which killed 270 people, and the 1989 bombing of a French UTA passenger plane over Niger, which claimed 170 lives. These attacks led to years of crippling United Nations sanctions, and turned Gaddafi into an international outcast. His government was seen as a rogue entity, a dangerous and unpredictable force that financed terror and destabilized the region, making any form of diplomatic engagement nearly impossible for Western nations. Yet, in the early 2000s, Gaddafi began a surprising effort to rehabilitate his image and bring Libya back into the international community. He renounced his weapons of mass destruction programs, accepted responsibility for the Lockerbie bombing, and paid compensation to the victims' families. This diplomatic charm offensive appeared to work. Sanctions were lifted, and Western leaders, once his staunchest critics, began to cautiously re-engage with Tripoli. Among the most notable of these new relationships was the one cultivated with France under President Nicolas Sarkozy. The relationship was complex, and as later revealed, deeply compromised by clandestine dealings that would eventually explode into a major political scandal. The friendship between Sarkozy and Gaddafi reached a dramatic peak in 2007, shortly after Sarkozy's election. In a move that shocked many, Gaddafi was invited for a state visit to Paris, where he famously pitched his traditional Bedouin tent near the Élysée Palace. This visit symbolized Gaddafi's successful return from the diplomatic wilderness. However, behind this public display of reconciliation lay dark allegations. It is now claimed that Gaddafi's regime secretly funneled millions of euros to illegally finance Sarkozy's 2007 presidential campaign. This alleged corruption pact was supposedly made in exchange for political legitimacy and favors, including potential help in quashing the conviction of Gaddafi's spy chief for the UTA bombing. The accusations surrounding this illicit funding have since become the biggest political financing scandal in modern French history. Gaddafi's own son, Saif al-Islam, publicly claimed that Libya had financed Sarkozy's rise to power and demanded the money be returned. Evidence, including witness testimonies and financial documents, has led to a lengthy trial for the former French president, which began in early 2025. The scandal illustrates the murky and transactional nature of Gaddafi's late-era diplomacy. He sought legitimacy on the world stage, and some Western leaders, it is alleged, were willing to look past his brutal record in exchange for financial or political gain, creating a web of intrigue and corruption. The carefully constructed image of Gaddafi as a reformed statesman shattered in 2011 with the arrival of the Arab Spring. Inspired by popular uprisings in neighboring Tunisia and Egypt, protests erupted in the eastern Libyan city of Benghazi. The demonstrations quickly spread across the country as decades of pent-up anger against his oppressive rule were unleashed. Gaddafi's response was swift and merciless. He denounced the protesters as rats and cockroaches and vowed to hunt them down house by house, unleashing his military forces to crush the rebellion. His brutal crackdown turned the protests into a full-scale civil war, pitting his loyalist forces against a determined but disorganized opposition. As the violence escalated and a humanitarian crisis loomed, the international community was forced to act. In a stunning reversal of his previous relationship with Gaddafi, French President Nicolas Sarkozy became a leading advocate for military intervention. Along with the United Kingdom and the United States, France championed a United Nations Security Council resolution authorizing a no-fly zone over Libya to protect civilians. This resolution paved the way for a NATO-led air campaign that provided crucial support to the rebel forces on the ground. The intervention effectively crippled Gaddafi's military capabilities, leveling the playing field and allowing the opposition to gain momentum in their fight to end his 42-year dictatorship. For months, Gaddafi remained defiant, evading capture as rebel forces advanced across the country, eventually taking the capital, Tripoli, in August 2011. His rule officially collapsed, but the man himself remained at large, a fugitive in the country he had dominated for so long. His final stand came in his hometown of Sirte. On October 20, 2011, after his convoy was struck by a NATO airstrike, he was discovered hiding in a drainage pipe. In a chaotic and gruesome scene captured on mobile phones and broadcast to the world, the once-feared dictator was captured, beaten, and ultimately killed by opposition fighters, bringing a violent and ignominious end to his long reign. The news of his death was met with jubilant celebrations in Libya and a sense of relief in many Western capitals. It seemed to mark the dawn of a new era for the Libyan people, a chance to build a democratic and free nation from the ashes of dictatorship. The international coalition that had aided his downfall celebrated the intervention as a success, a model for protecting civilians from a tyrannical regime. However, the initial optimism soon faded. The very forces that had united to overthrow Gaddafi quickly splintered, and the power vacuum left by his demise would soon plunge the country into an even deeper and more protracted cycle of violence and instability. In the years following Gaddafi's death, Libya did not transition into the stable democracy many had hoped for. Instead, the country descended into a devastating civil war. The revolutionary brigades that had fought together to oust the dictator refused to disarm and instead turned their guns on each other, carving the nation into a patchwork of rival fiefdoms controlled by competing militias and political factions. The country became split between two main rival governments, one in the west, recognized by the United Nations, and another in the east, led by the powerful military commander Khalifa Haftar. This division has paralyzed the nation, preventing the establishment of unified state institutions and leaving its people caught in the crossfire. The ongoing instability has created a profound and lasting humanitarian crisis. The infrastructure, once a source of pride under Gaddafi, has crumbled due to conflict and neglect. This was tragically highlighted in September 2023, when two dams collapsed near the city of Derna, leading to catastrophic flooding that killed thousands of people. The disaster was widely blamed on years of corruption and inaction by the country's rival authorities, a stark symbol of the state's failure to provide basic security and services for its citizens. Furthermore, the chaos has turned Libya into a major hub for human trafficking, with migrants and refugees suffering horrific abuses in lawless detention centers. Gaddafi's legacy is therefore deeply complex and bitterly contested, both within Libya and abroad. For some, particularly older Libyans, he is remembered for the stability and social welfare his rule provided, a stark contrast to the chaos that followed. They recall a time of free education, healthcare, and a strong, unified national identity. However, for the countless victims of his regime and the younger generations who fought for freedom, he is remembered as a brutal tyrant who crushed dissent, looted the nation's wealth, and isolated Libya from the world. This division in memory reflects the deep fractures that continue to define Libyan society today, with no national consensus on how to remember the man who dominated their lives for so long. Ultimately, Gaddafi left behind a dual legacy, one of a long and oppressive dictatorship, and another of the violent power vacuum that followed his fall. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the unpredictable consequences of revolution and foreign intervention. While his regime was responsible for gross human rights violations and international terrorism, its sudden collapse without a viable plan for the future unleashed forces that have proven just as destructive. Today, as the Sarkozy corruption trial continues to unfold in 2025, the world is reminded of the toxic and far-reaching impact of Gaddafi's rule, a legacy of chaos and intrigue that continues to haunt both Libya and Europe.